Welcome to the Ed Up Experience College Closure Series. College Closure Through the Eyes of. Today, we look at college closure through the eyes of Dr. Joseph Chillo. Dr. Chillo was president of Newberry College in Brookline, Massachusetts, when it closed at the end of the 2019 academic year. I am your host, Dr. J. Keehn. According to records reported by the Higher Education Dive Team, there have been 118 colleges that have closed or merged since 2016. I worked for one of those 118 colleges. Experts are predicting hundreds of more colleges to close or merge over the next 5 to 10 years. There are many reasons that a college may close: lack of funds, declining enrollment, reduction in state funding, low perception of value of higher education, damage to the academic reputation of the college, maybe an accreditation issue, or simply gross and significant mismanagement. But what often gets lost in this drastic outcome is the human trauma that has become a byproduct. This podcast series examines the human story through the eyes of the president, faculty, staff, and student. As stated, today I am talking with Dr. Joseph Chillo, who was the president of Newberry College when it closed at the end of the 2019 academic year. Dr. Chillo, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Jay. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and tell a little bit about the story at Newberry College.
Yes, I'm excited to hear about it. So let's just jump right into it. When did you know that you had to go through the college closing process?
Now listen up.
Insights EDU 2025 is almost here. Join us February 12th through 14th in New Orleans for the most anticipated higher education marketing and enrollment management event of the year.
I like that.
Imagine 3 action-packed days filled with game-changing insights, real-world case studies, and a hands-on workshop designed to transform your marketing strategy and boost your program enrollment. Learn from speakers at Google, Meta, Reddit, MIQ Digital, and top schools across the nation. Network with industry leaders, exchange ideas, and discover the tools to drive real results. This is your opportunity to stay ahead of the competition and meet the demands of today's modern learners. Don't wait, spots are filling fast. Mark your calendar, rally your team, and head to insightsedu.com to register now. The era of the modern learner is here, and you need to be part of it. We'll see you in New Orleans. Ellucian Live is taking place April 6th through 9th, 2025 in Orlando, Florida.
You just made the list.
Get ready for an unforgettable experience at Ellucian Live 2025. Join visionary leaders from institutions worldwide as we dive into groundbreaking ideas, cutting-edge solutions, and transformative best practices that will ignite your passion for innovation. This is your chance to connect, collaborate, and propel your institution into the future. Do not miss out.
Let's go.
Do you want to get invites to special events? Do you want to get exclusive early access to ad-free episodes, extended episodes, bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes episodes, and original content? Do you want to accelerate your professional development? Well, you can go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com and become a subscriber today.
Let me give you a little bit of backdrop. So when I arrived at Newberry College, I arrived first as the vice president for enrollment management, and that happened in the summer of 2008. And for your listeners, and for those of you who know higher education and know what was going on at that time, that was an extremely challenging time because of the banking crisis that was taking place. And for institutions like Thomas More, let me back that up, as institutions like Newberry College were handling lots of student loans and transactions, and certainly the banking uncertainties of securing those loans. Being a tuition-driven institution, we saw firsthand the impact that that crisis started having on our students and the ability to access those types of bank loans to make sure that a college education was accessible and affordable. And it's certainly over the 5 years of serving as the vice president and then executive vice president before I took over as president, each year was always a challenge. You know, we were a tuition-driven institution. Our endowment at the time was roughly about $2 million. Of the 2 million, about 1.3 million of that was restricted for scholarship. And so we didn't really have a financial pool to have and to utilize should there something go awry or go wrong with enrollment. And so as long as we were meeting our enrollment opportunities and numbers, the opportunity for the college to continue to move forward. But there was lots of writings on the wall in terms of the stress that the institution was going under because you were living year to year. By 2014, I had become president at that time. I remember sitting down with our board of trustees in the summer of 14. So I was in the presidency for all of about 2 months at that time. And we started tracking out what Plan A would look like if the college could continue on its own. What would we require to invest in facilities and the endowment, and how much we would need to raise funds for. And then we also started looking at what Track B would look like. What would an acquisition or a merger look like for the institution? And so we started running this parallel system from a management standpoint starting in 2014. But by 2017, it really became evident by the end of 2017 that we were leaning more to Plan B, which was we needed to start finding a merger and acquisition partner if the college was going to be able to survive the demographic challenges that we were seeing, the changes in perception on the value of higher education, and certainly the ability of families and students to afford a private education.
Let me react to two things that you said there. First, you talked about the banking crisis, and it's not something that a lot of people talked about and how that impacted colleges. Meaning, in my research and in my conducting these podcasts, I hear about low enrollment. I hear about, tuition driven, and when you have low enrollment and you're, relying on tuition, you're not getting the money. I hear about no pool of money to back, as a backup plan. But what I don't hear is that institutions who were relying on getting bank loans to, cover the gap, that affected it. I did hear it in my old institution later on after it had already stopped, or I should say stopped missing payments and we knew that it was going to close. That one last ditch effort that they were trying to get a loan didn't happen because of the crisis. But most people don't talk about that. And we see, I started off the podcast mentioning a whole list of possible reasons, but what are those impacts and how did it come? Another reaction I have is you as a leader, you and your board, realizing that you may have to go to Plan B at a time where Plan B might have been, reasonable. Most people wait too late, and you had a plan, right? But that only came after you realized that you were impacted by the bank crisis, and no one really talks about that overlap on the impact of higher education. So then that's where you were, and you realized you're at the doorstep of closure. What were your emotions when you realized it?
Yeah, it was a difficult situation because I think when you look at it in many ways, you try to take the emotion out of the work. And when we came to the realization that a Plan B needed to be enacted, of course, no one really has the go-to book, as I joke about it. We had some good case examples of institutions that did it well in a very planful way, and we watched other institutions who, quite frankly, were a train wreck. We had an institution in our backyard, Mount Ida College, that relatively closed overnight. And so here they are having a commencement, and a few weeks later, they make an announcement that they're not going to open for the fall semester. And that was a challenge for the marketplace because we knew that we had the ability to do it right. What we had to determine is what were the timeline and what was the realities of trying to acquire a merger or a partner institution, knowing that our biggest value was the asset of our real estate. And as you know, when you start looking at the finances of these, it's often difficult to materialize the real estate portion of the campus because that's one of the greatest assets that we had. Being in Brookline, Massachusetts, that was the benefit financially for the institution, where the 7 acres of land that we had for the campus had a value of about $30 million at the time. And we had about $8 million of debt. So, we knew back at that point that once we leveraged the real estate, that we were going to have assets left over. And so unlike other institutions where they're closing and these decisions are brought on because of financial distress, where it leaves the institution with no remaining financial assets after the closure, that was not going to be our story. So we knew that we had the ability to develop the runway. We knew that we wanted to make sure that our mission and that our students were protected as best we could, along with our employees. And so we started out this plan in late summer of 2018 to really develop a program that kept those two things in mind. We wanted to make sure that our mission was protected and that we did best by our students.
And I mentioned this to you offline, that one of the things I'm finding in my research and in doing this podcasting, and you really just touched on this, is there's a dichotomy of ways that this is happening, right? There are those colleges who are aware, who are recognizing, who are saying that we're on a path to, we can't sustain this anymore. And so we have to do something to protect our students, our staff, our faculty. We have to do something to honor the legacy and the program. So, so we do this with dignity, right? Ethically. And then there are those colleges that, what I've been calling fail at failure, right? They realize they're closing, but they just keep on, they don't want to admit it. So they keep saying, we're going to restructure, we're going to do this. And then suddenly they have to close the doors. They're not offering classes anymore. The students don't know about it until maybe a few days before the semester starts, or following the previous commencement, like you just shared with Mount Ida. And it's the other side, of this that really is impactful and painful. And it's not less painful to do it your way. Your way is just doing it with more dignity. Your way is doing it successfully and protecting the students and the staff, right? But it's still painful to the people involved. So how did you navigate the challenge of balancing inside information with transparency to your faculty and staff and perhaps even your students?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jane. It's one that, kept you up at night. Let's put it that way. As we were working on this plan and, I'm a type of leader that believes in servant leadership and a high level of transparency. As you can imagine, a lot of this was also confidential, and a lot of this was also working in an environment that, we were relying on others to also keep this information confidential. Because the first thing that we really embarked upon as we were looking at a potential merger with an institution, of course, was the opportunity to see if that was going to be a viable path. And one of the things that we wanted to make certain of was that when we looked at a merger, we simply did not want to merge with another weak institution, because I'm a firm believer when you look at acquisitions and mergers, if you put two weak institutions together, you're not going to have a viable new institution. What's going to happen is that you're going to have a weaker, larger institution that simply will not be able to weather the storm financially. And so we were very mindful of that. The second part of in our level of transparency and these conversations is that it really relied on a core group of individuals that were in leadership roles at the institution. And some of those members were on my board, and some of those were members of my cabinet team. But we kept that circle pretty tight for the first couple of months because, again, we didn't know which path we were really going to go down on in terms of, was this going to be a merger and acquisition or a closure? And then we also had to figure out, because our mandate from myself and certainly from the board's perspective was to protect the mission of our students, was really how do we go out and start developing these teach-outs to best protect our students so they wouldn't lose credits. They also had the opportunity to do this in a way where we would maximize the net tuition revenues so that what they were paying at Newberry would be the same price they would be paying at the new institution until they graduated. And so we put certain demands and expectations on these teach-out agreements to make sure that our students were in the best alignment to complete their degree. And as you can imagine, when you're working on these teach-outs, you're working with accreditation, you're working with the Massachusetts Board of Higher Education, plus you're working with all of college and universities that you're developing these teach-outs for. And so by the time we were done, we had about 8 to 10 of these teach-out agreements, all organized the way that best suited our students from a credit standpoint and from a cost standpoint. Plus, we had worked it all through the accreditation part, even before we made the announcement we were going to close. And so that level of due diligence was critically important to keep making sure that our mission and students were protected. But as you can imagine, only a small group, there was probably about 10 or 12 of us that had this working going on. And so it was a very stressful time, both professionally and personally. And the other part of it was that there was constant stress in terms of, something that quite frankly, no one else knew on campus. And so that part I think was really agonizing. I know for myself and for my colleagues that actually knew that information. And so placing that burden of leadership sometimes, I think we don't highlight that enough, that these individuals have that responsibility. But if they're doing it the right way and there's a level of trust, it works well for the institution and for all involved. When they don't have the level of trust, or it becomes more about what I call the me syndrome, then it starts unraveling pretty quickly.
Right. And to follow that up, so you were like on campus, you and your small group of insiders, you're on campus, you're going about your day as if everything is good and normal. And yet, you're passing by colleagues, professors, staff members, students who don't know what you know, right? And they're going about their day as if everything's normal. But in your back of your head, you know that not everything is normal. You know that you may be on a path to have to shut it all down, but they don't. And that had to be a challenge for you. And they probably also saw some red flags, and they may have seen some of the warning signs. Was there anybody or groups of people who started questioning you, and how did you navigate, again, keeping the information inside that you had to keep with the people who were just saying, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's a great point, Jay. And there were red flags. So this was a process by which, we were in front of our accrediting body pretty regularly, starting in late 2017, early 2018. The New England Association of Colleges, which was known as NEASC, which is known as NICHE now, had us on probation because we didn't meet the financial standards. And so we shared that information with our community and certainly with our faculty, staff, and students. That disclosure was probably the first red flags that folks saw. But we also had red flags that were going along the time period. We had to make cuts in benefits, for example. We had to suspend our 403B plan to make sure that we were not spending money on the benefits portion where we could reallocate those resources to programs within our mission and certainly our student budget and student operations portions of this. So, during that 17 and 18 time period, there were red flags. And I made it a policy of our administration that if we were asked, we were going to be transparent. And when people used to come up and say, Joe, what's going to happen here? And I would tell them that we're looking at a number of options. And one of those options is a merger. One of those options is potential closure. But we're going to give you as much time in this process that we can before we make that decision. And I assured people that you will not wake up the next day and find that your payroll was missing, your benefits were not paid. You're not going to find out that classes were not going to resume on a Monday. So we had a standard, what we called operating process that was tied to our mission that drove every decision and how we were communicating this out to the large audience.
Wow. I say wow because, again, that kind of nuance, that kind of detailed planning isn't always there, right? And, experiences that I've experienced, but also have heard of people finding out, or the red flags, even if they were there beforehand, certainly started showing up when their paychecks weren't there, right? And not knowing beforehand, you kind of did all that communication piece right. Another observation, you mentioned the involvement of accreditation and put you on financial probation. And this is not, to me, we're not going to talk about this right now, but the role of accreditation and when they get involved, allows for you, if you had, it seems, good communication, transparency with them, and them putting on probation, allowed for you to say, okay, maybe this is the time to start analyzing our financials to make sure that we protect, we have enough as we close, we have enough to protect our staff. They won't lose payments and so forth, right? Whereas there are places, or there are accreditations who wait too long. And by that point, it's already too late for the college as well to make certain plans. And so while we won't talk about the accreditation role, that does play a piece in how you, as the president, react to what's going on and the timing of it all. If they let you be and there's no probation, you can still be going forward thinking that everything is going to be okay and continue, piling on debt and not having what you have to do to close with dignity.
Yeah, and I think there's two parts to that, Jay. One part, and you're right, one part of it is the accreditation process. The second part, which I know we won't get into here, but it's something to think through in these conversations, is the relationship with the bank that the institution has. And that's another thing, I think, as we look at closures and mergers and so forth, not a lot of attention is getting, but the relationship that the institution has with its bank, and certainly how it leverages its line of credit, becomes critically important in this process. Because one of the things that we did early on with our bank is that we had that frank conversation that we were going to solidify the salary and benefits number that the institution had for this period of time. And we basically moved those funds aside. And so even though we had debt and other AP issues that were coming up, we had assurances from the bank that we could earmark that money and reserve that money for salary and benefits to make sure that as we were looking at that closure, that nothing was going to interrupt that ability to secure salary and benefits for that period of time. And this is where, again, when you have the real estate value above its debt, we had the ability to do that. But that all came back to because we had a really good relationship with the bank that we had.
And that's great. Let me ask you this. I never really thought of it this way. But you bring up a piece that I really am now curious to know about. The president, when you get to the level of president, it is presumed that not only do you have the academic background, curriculum, staff, leadership, budgeting, but also a business acumen, right? But is there part of this, you don't go into it thinking that you don't end up closing a college. Is there part of this that not only took you by surprise, but you didn't feel that you were prepared for, you didn't have the knowledge for, you had to rely on other people? I'm sure you had a strong team to deal with this, but something that you weren't prepared for.
You just made the list.
Mark your calendars for Insights EDU 2025, February 12th through 14th. Insights EDU 2025 is the can't-miss higher education marketing and enrollment management conference of the year. We're taking over New Orleans with speakers from Google, Meta, Reddit, MIQ Digital, and top schools across the country. Discover how AI is transforming marketing and enrollment management, how to assess online program opportunities, and meet the demands of today's modern learner. Don't wait. Spots are going quickly. Register now at insightsedu.com. Welcome to the era of the modern learner.
Let's go!
At Lucian Live 2025, we're going to explore the magic of innovation. We want to imagine, believe, and achieve. It's happening April 6th through 9th, 2025 in Orlando, Florida, and we're going to explore technology, modernization, and
artificial intelligence.
Explore the latest technology solutions, discover industry insights, and make valuable connections as a global community. It's time to register for Ellucian Live 2025 at elive.ellucian.com.
Do you want to accelerate your professional development? Do you want to get exclusive early access to ad-free episodes, extended episodes, bonus episodes, original content? That's right, original content, invites to special events, and more? Do you want to get all this while helping to sustain EdUp? Then go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com and subscribe today.
Yeah, again, this was a complex decision in some ways because the complexity, certainly no one person had the skill set. And so we had to have a strong team. And part of that decision making that I had was, at the time, my CFO, who was a good CFO, was just not familiar with this type of work. I had to make a change in that CFO to bring somebody in that had a corporate background, that had a background in mergers and acquisitions to help the institution navigate through this. And quite frankly, we brought the bank right to the table because I didn't have a banking background. Nobody around my team had a banking background. The experts were certainly sitting in the workout groups at the bank. And you're right, we had to pull some key levers here, knowing that the expertise didn't sit at the college level, but they were connected to the college. And so how do we create a team that was nimble and agile to allow us to do that work on a regular basis became critically important for us. And so we had to make those decisions pretty early on, saying, yep, we need a new CFO. We needed to bring the bank to the table. So, instead of these quarterly meetings, we needed monthly meetings with the bank and have the bank's workout team be part of the extension of our financial operation so that we knew how we were going to manage AP, how we were going to manage the line of credit, how we were going to leverage all of that to make sure that there was no interruption in the operations of the institution. So part of the CEO responsibility is knowing when you don't know something and you've got to bring the right people to the table to help move the institution forward.
Well, you just led to my next comment, right? Because you're saying you didn't know everything about banking, you didn't have that expertise, but you knew that you didn't know it. So you brought them to the table. So you had to change your CFO, right? You knew what you were able to do and what you didn't have, not only with yourself, but as with your team, and you brought them to the table. And again, that's not all leaders are like that. Most leaders would say, oh, I can figure this out, or I'll do it, or I'll lead my team to it, but they don't know what their weaknesses are or not willing to admit it, so they won't bring in the right people. So I commend you for that. I commend you for everything because, closing a college is not easy, and to do it ethically and with dignity to your staff and your students is good. And I suspect that my next question was answered in pieces already, but I was going to ask what efforts were made to avoid having to close. Now, I guess you've talked about this again, but if there's one thing you want to emphasize on that.
Yeah, one of the life lessons is also understanding the complexities of acquisitions and mergers. And, when we think about these opportunities and especially what's being written today and the conversations that higher education leaders are having about the benefits and certainly the opportunities that we're going to have to look at, how do we work in alliances? How do we think about the future of higher education? It's also understanding the complexities that these mergers and acquisitions bring, because you're not only trying to balance the needs of the two institutions that are trying to come together, or the accreditation needs, or the U.S. Department of Education, or the banks that are sitting there, or the vendors that are at your table in terms of the institutions that we serve. But these are complex matters that are not going to be resolved in a matter of weeks or months. These are things that are going to take time, and you really have to make sure that you have the window and the landing opportunity, as we were calling it, to land the plane in that 12 to 18 month window. Because if you cut it too short, it makes no difference in terms of your intentions. You're just not going to have the ability to navigate all the other bodies that you have to deal with in order to get these transactions done. We watched it even in our situation where, we made the decision and we made the public announcement to close in December of 2018. And that closure date was set for May of 2019. So it gave our folks about 6 months notification to determine next steps. More importantly, it got us to finish our graduating class. It helped our faculty and staff to have 6 months of employment to leverage to the next employment opportunity. But one of the takeaways in all this was the complexity that the Attorney General's office brings in, because these deals and transactions, particularly when you're a nonprofit and you have an endowment and you have monies left over, is the role of the Attorney General's office. And so it was one that, we kind of said, okay, yes, they have a role because of the endowment. What you didn't realize was that they had a much bigger role because we were selling the institution, and we had to get an understanding of what the expectations were of the Attorney General's office. And so even though we were, officially sunset in May of 2019, the workings of the college continued on for almost another year because we had to dispose of the endowment assets. And again, no one told you that process. We learned that process about a month or two before we did our closing on the real estate transaction, and all of a sudden realized that we were sitting on about $12 million of assets at that point in time that we had to give away.
And so how did you give it away?
So we followed an RFP process. So what we did is two things were critically important for us. One was to maintain the legacy of Newberry College. Newberry was a Title III institution, served about 65% Pell-eligible students, and we wanted to make certain that the ability to foster student success for first-generation students was critically important to that legacy. And so we sent out an RFP to a number of other institutions in the Boston area to see who would make the investment to secure and be good stewards of that money to help foster student success through a Newberry Institute. And ultimately, Boston University came forward to support the Newberry Institute at Boston University, and they're doing tremendous work on students who are first-generation and Pell Grant recipients today as a result of that legacy. And so the legacy of our institution continues today. The important work of creating access and opportunity is still there today. But that was important work that was being done, and that legacy continues to benefit students today.
That's great. And the students that weren't graduating at the end of that semester who still had time to go, what happened with them?
So we had teach-outs with about 10 different institutions throughout the Boston area. Most of our students actually enrolled. I think the number was about 60% of our students enrolled in that fall semester at one of those 10 institutions. But we still had about a good 25% of our students that were unaccounted for during that first semester and that first year. Some went back to community colleges. Some stopped out, went back into the workforce. But those teach-out agreements played a critical role in making certain that students had an option after Newberry. So we had our last graduating class of about 125 students that graduated. And then about 60% of the remaining students went on to other institutions in the Boston area that had the opportunity to continue with their education and ultimately earn their degree from those institutions.
But again, you, as the leader, your institution, set this up for the students, set up the agreements with the 10 institutions, as opposed to, again, the other side of the coin where the institutions that we've heard of that just shut down and, again, like I said, fail at failing, left it up to the students to get their transcripts. Some that have never gotten their transcripts because websites are down or there's no registrar staff or no anything to contact, left it up to the students to enroll somewhere else of their choice, right? Or left it on the shoulders of the students. And again, in your case, with the idea being doing this in a dignified, ethical manner, made sure that you had the plans for the students. Two more questions before we close. Talk about how this affected you personally. I know you touched on this at the beginning. Just it's a stressful time. You're going through something that you never would have thought you had to go through. How did it affect your personal life?
Yeah, it was, you look back on it, Jay, and it was, it was a whirlwind. That was putting it nicely. I was working at the time easily 18 to 20 hours a day, mainly because you just want to make certain that nothing was going to be dropped. And, being a type A personality like myself, I wanted to make sure that there was nothing being dropped. We were not going to show up in the newspaper the next morning, or we were getting that phone call, what's going on. And so, that stress lasted from about the fall of 18 all the way up until, I don't think I had a good night's sleep until the day after commencement in May of 19. For those 6 to 9 months, it was a stressful time. And it was also, you started wondering about, the impact it was having on your personal life. And, my family, did an extraordinary job to support myself in our personal way. To make sure they understood and, I had their support in the work that we were doing. You can also imagine not everybody was happy with the decision that I made that we were closing. And so there were those personal attacks on social media, and you had to, almost develop some iron skin a little bit where you couldn't let those things fester and bother you because, quite frankly, people were mad at you. People were, discouraged in terms of what was happening. And so you couldn't take it personally, but you had to allow them to vent and to embrace that. And that's just the work that we have to do as servant leaders of the institutions that we serve. And then was also the uncertainty of what was the next step. Here I am, a president of an institution for 5 years, made that difficult decision to close. What would the horizon look like in terms of the next step from a career standpoint? But I also spent, a lot of time worrying about my colleagues and my friends at Newberry to make sure that, they had opportunities for their careers as well. And that's another part that, we worked relentlessly on in terms of calling colleagues at other institutions to say, look, I've got a great faculty member in this subject area, or, I had a great enrollment manager, and, we were making phone calls all the way through May to make certain that he had a landing spot as soon as we closed in May. But that work was just a tremendous burden personally. And like I said, I don't think I slept for a good night until after commencement was over, and probably wasn't that summer where you finally took a deep breath and said, okay, we're turning the page now personally. But Newberry still holds a special place in my heart because I know the work we were doing there. I know the benefit that we were serving to create student access and affordability and creating that student opportunity that they don't get at every other institution. And so that work, while it's missed, also created a vacuum in the Boston market, because when these institutions close, there's not many other institutions that are opening their doors in such a way that are serving those large populations of students that are needing to go on for their education to advance their opportunities, both professionally and personally.
Well, you would think that there are, because there's, Newberry in the Boston, New England area was not the only college that closed or struggled, right? So you would think that the ones that are still with their doors open would want those students that are searching. They'll suck them in, right?
Yeah, but as an enrollment manager, here's your problem, though. When you watch this with some of the schools in the Boston market. So, there was one school particularly in the Boston market that was, their enrollment plan was they were taking these students on. And as an enrollment manager, and this, it helps your enrollment number, for maybe a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year window. The problem is, as soon as you have those students flush out of the system by graduating, you're right back to where you were 3 or 4 years ago from an enrollment standpoint. The other challenge that you have is that most of these students are coming with high discount rates in the 60% number. Your net tuition revenue is not the same on those 200 to 300 students as they are for the previous 200 or 300 that are coming to your institution. All of a sudden, you're looking at this problem as an enrollment manager or as a president or a CFO, where this could be a 3 or 4 year horizon that all of a sudden you're going to have this impact in 3 or 4 years to your own institution.
Dr. Chillo.
Yes, Jay, you're there?
I am there. My computer crashed for a second, but I think I'm still here.
I got you.
You talked about the Boston market.
So I was talking about the Boston market, and here's the problem. As you know from an enrollment manager, there are institutions that will become the target to draw in these students once an institution closes because they serve a very similar demographic. Now, that enrollment helps that institution for maybe 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year period. But then what happens is that during that 1, 2, or 3 year period, that institution relies on those financial dollars to help support the institution, to help grow the institution. But once those students go through that cycle, they're back to where they were 3 years earlier in terms of not having those financial dollars readily at hand. And so what's happening in a lot of marketplaces right now is that you're watching these institutions that were once thriving because other institutions were closing. They were the beneficiaries of those student enrollments and tuition dollars. But you're also now watching that closures have slowed down. You're also watching this demographic cliff, particularly in the New England market, that's going to force more and more of these conversations between mergers and acquisitions to take place.
Yeah, but you would think that at the end of that enrollment cycle, they can use that time to help market and bring in new people. But I hear what you're saying about the enrollment management, conundrum there. So, you mentioned about it being the time then to, after graduation, May was over, you were able to finally breathe to look at your next steps. Do you want to talk about where you are now?
So I was very fortunate where I wasn't sure what I wanted to do as the next step. I was thinking of, what does another presidency look like? What does the world of consultancy look like? Do I want to go back in and serve in some capacity in administration? So I had lots of opportunities, which was really a benefit. But I did decide to take the opportunity to become the 15th president of Thomas More University, which is a small university in northern Kentucky. We serve about 2,400 students. It's a thriving institution here in northern Kentucky. Our enrollments are growing. We have just completed our 5-year strategic plan. We're in the process of completing year 4 of a capital campaign, which has raised more than $40 million for the institution. We built our first new academic building in more than 50 years at the institution. It's an institution that's growing. And so the work is exciting because it's very different than what I was doing at Newberry. But it's exciting because I can continue to do the work that's important to me as a servant leader. The mission is critically important. The work that we do with our students day in and day out is critically important. The last 5 years have flown by, but I do benefit my experience at Newberry in terms of making me a better president and making me understand where my strengths are and where those opportunities for continued development are. I'm working on it every day to make sure that I can continue to be the best president that I can be for the institution that I serve.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You've taken some, hard, troubling experience and grew from it, which, again, not everyone does that. So I commend you for it. Last question.
Yeah.
Last question. What lessons can you share with others who may find themselves in your position?
Attention, higher ed leaders. Are you ready to transform your marketing and enrollment strategy? Don't miss Insights EDU, February 12th through 14th in New Orleans, the premier conference for higher education marketing and enrollment management. Spots are filling fast. Register now at insightsedu.com. Welcome to the era of the modern learner.
Let's go!
Are you going to miss Ellucian Live this year?
I don't think so.
Exactly. So you might as well register right now at elive.ellucian.com. Ellucian Live 2025, April 6th through 9th in Orlando, Florida. Do not miss it.
Do you want to get exclusive early access to ad-free episodes, extended episodes, bonus episodes, original content, invites to special events, and more? Do you want to accelerate your professional development? Do you want to get all this while helping to sustain EdUp? Then go to edupexperience.com. That's EDUP experience.com and become a subscriber today.
Yeah, there's my 3 takeaways that I share with other presidents when I have this conversation is, 1, don't make it about yourself. It's about the mission of your institution, and it's about the benefit to your students, the faculty, and staff. you have to understand your role as a servant leader in this process. And you have to get out of the mindset it's about yourself, or there are things that are more important than you. The most important thing that you do is that you're a servant leader, and that has to be first and foremost in this process. The second thing that you have to do is make certain that you look around and you have people who are not going to be afraid to tell you the truth, and you have the right team on the plane for yourself. You have to make certain that there are times when it may not be cabinet that's best serving the president. You have to figure out the best team that you're going to put around you in order to solve these complex issues. And the third thing that I tell folks is that while you are planning for every scenario and plan, and you will come up with a plan that is really well-versed and well-detailed and will spell out 90% of the things that you will see, there's about 10 to 15% of the things that you will not see. And how do you plan for the uncertainty? And so, like I said a little bit earlier, one of the things that we wanted to plan for uncertainty was we wanted to make sure that our salaries and benefits were paid all the way through that May 2019 timeline. The second thing was to make sure that we were going to finish the spring semester. And so if we were going to open our doors and continue to operate, we had to finish an academic year. So we had certainty in December that we could do that by May of 19, but there was no certainty that if we opened in September of 19, that we could operate and certainly fulfill our requirements as an institution by 2020. And so that uncertainty has to be managed. And so when you are a leader in this role, that level of transparency, that level of frankness needs to be built around you.
Those are great lessons. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for your vulnerability, for your honesty. I've learned a lot in the last 40, 45 minutes, and I'm certain that my listeners will as well. Dr. Chillo, thank you again.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the story.